So back to the formula concept. I'll get this cord out of the way.
That's fine. Okay, so what I had, the revelation that I particularly had at the point in time that you're discussing with the formulas coming to being was, as I have stated, most science was, the meaning of life was supposed to be in an equation, a singular equation in most people, and that's where the flaw was. For me, the meaning of life is two equations, and they're both the inverse of each other. And like everything else, there was when you're trying to do something for the betterment of yourself, it's an internal process, but yet your interaction with the outside world is the external process.
Right.
So everything should be that, and there was the whole yin-yang thing and everything else.
Right.
There's always two, it always comes down to two more than anything else. So theatrical mathematics was the application of our color representations, and as I explained us, Steve being the hinges, myself being the lock, Greg being the door, and Warren being the structure.
Yep.
The same thing was applicable in communication. If we elevate it from communication to actual being, we wanted to take where something was right now and to predict where it would be in the future.
Yes.
And that would be a true actualization of cosmic energy coming to fruition in a physical reality.
Yes.
Hence the two equations.
Right.
And the biggest thing for me in that was the relegation of the roles and using the purple as a filter for reality on a reality level.
Your handwriting, by the way, your original notes on this right here in front of you.
That would be nice.
That's all your original stuff that you were scribbling at the time.
Wow.
Look at that boyish grin. You were hot, Mike. You had it all going on right there. See, these are the graphs and stuff. We'll get to those in a second, but here's your original paperwork on the V1, V2, V3.
Before I figured out exactly how to put it into us.
Right. You would just try to bust this language up, you know? That's what it's all about. The brains.
Yes.
Now, can you just briefly talk about these brains and that whole concept?
Yes. Well, what we needed to do was figure out how each of us worked and how we applied how we worked. I had always known who I am and how I work. The same principle applies for every individual on the planet. If we were all supposed to be specific representations of entities, then we would all have the same makeup, but the application of that makeup would be different.
Right.
And since there were four of us, it would only make sense that it would be quadrantly done. And because in the four colors that we represented, the four levels of understanding, Larry, Moe, Curly, Shemp, or B.A. Baracus, or the A-Team application, as well as the conscious levels, the levels of consciousness to say.
Yes.
So with that, if we as individuals, we could be any of the sum of the parts or any of the whole of the sums. The point is, we had to separate our own biases and just be who we said we were going to be for this particular interaction. If I was to be red, then my makeup was going to have to be specific to in a quarter of the rest. I can't want to be Steve like Greg, you know, and not just like Greg. The whole point was I needed to define us as individuals for our belief system, and then that way we could use, or if we were functioning in that makeup, if I am to be blue, this is how I must process and work. If I am to be red, this is how I must be processed and work. Or
we'll get back to the Mandela in a moment, but right now, just on the equation level here, in the red text that I have transcribed, a lot of what you're talking about is how, with this four levels of our brains, okay, each of us has within him all the others, okay? And this is a chart which explains how we would use it all in that way. Mike, Warren, Greg, Steve. Okay, we'll get to that.
I have to help myself. So.
Oh, there you go. That's this is one of your big graphs right here, Mike, where this is just a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, see, this is where things became askew because I decided to use the Christianity as one of
Well, that's
the
inevitable.
quadrants, only because of our basis, and I shouldn't have gone that way with it.
Yeah, but ultimately it has value as a an example of exercise. And there's others. We'll get to those,
that's
right?
proof too.
Oh, of course.
So back to
Yeah, let's get back to the brains just for a second here. And now this concept that you had in play.
I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm also looking at other.
Yeah. And here's more of your V1, V2, V3 development.
I had actually had somewhere I had written what the different symbols stand for in the R plus P equals G minus B, what the plus and the minuses and all that stood for. And that way we were actually able to factor in events.
Now, was it one of the big
the equation?
It was one of the big graphs?
I don't believe so.
Or was it text like this?
It's text like this, and it should be right here in front of me. It just needs.
Oh, B equals.
Yes.
G equals.
That's exactly it right here.
Okay. And what is going on there, Mike?
What I'm trying to do is to explain ourselves to ourselves and why bringing the physical manifestations of the fourth dimension into the third dimensional reality isn't applicable unless everybody comes along with it. And B, on the flip side of that, show that we will not be able to influence the physical reality with our fourth dimensional knowledge unless it's for the betterment of man up through their acceptance level. In other words, that your concepts or your players, as real as they may be, could never physically step in front of the average Joe, because then they just become plot level and have relegated themselves to such a minute role in the universe that the average Joe is actually more powerful than them as soon as their existence comes into play.
Right.
And that mainly was necessary so that you could understand that even though the four of us were part of a council of seven that is that not rule but that sit in the council of the multiverse, not just this universe, does us no good at all. Because if we try to actualize that existence or prove that existence to the mortal beings that we have incorporated ourselves with, then it becomes the whole cult scenario all over again.
Right.
So the biggest thing it's just that this is all individual understandings. To apply it in a three-dimensional world, any idea that we wanted to be able to initialize and have gain acceptance would have to be filtered through the purple,
right,
in order for it to be able to become a reality in the third dimension. And that's what one of the actual equations allowed us to understand, that anything we wanted to actualize, a cure for AIDS, that in order for AIDS to be cured, or a treatment, we'll say, instead of the word cure, in order for that to be able to happen, that we would have to be able to filter it through the process. And basically what it said is, it would tell us that it would have to be a treatment acceptable by science and provable by science to be able to be applied to the everyday man.
Right.
So what would that science be? And that would be the inverse of the equation. By taking, we know what factors are necessary to make it actualized in reality. So how do we solve the equation?
Right.
And that became basically finding a science that indirectly solved the problem. Hence, ozone therapy.
Right.
Because oxygen therapy, the Coke bottle in vitro system was developed in the 1950s to try to deliver in vitro gases into the body without outside environmental compromise. In other words, they were trying to pump a gas into human tissue without outside atmosphere getting into the gas and compromising it.
Right.
So it had nothing to do with a treatment for AIDS. It had everything to do with developing a delivery system that could pump gases into the body without letting outside air get into the gases.
Yep.
And it just so happens that they used ozone, or medical grade oxygen. Medical grade ozone, which is O3. Why? Who knows? The point being is, a byproduct of the experiment, not only did it help prove the Coke bottle in vitro system as a success, where they were able to apply this gaseous form into tissue without it being compromised by the outside environment, but the tissue for some reason survived for 3 days on the medical grade ozone. And in its proper in proper doses, it turns out that no virus, bacteria, or fungus can live in this aerobic environment. That an oxygen environment kills these things.
You talk about that in here, right?
HIV
as well.
happens to be a virus.
Yeah.
So we have a way to deliver, which we didn't care about, but we actually have what needs to be delivered in vitro to the body to destroy viruses, fungi, and bacteria.
Yeah.
So hence we came up with a solution to a problem that could be acceptable in science and applied to a major situation, proving the theories themselves.
Right.
And the only way that we were able to do that was by using theatrical mathematics to take the actual problem that we were looking at and make it an actualization, as well as actualize our individual roles in the cosmic to apply those principles.
Right.
With me being B.A. Baracus, creating the vehicle that could get us there, put it in a physical reality. I, B.A. Baracus, drove the vehicle down to San Diego that had the guy in it that was going on the TV show to be able to, if you can find them.
Right. Right.
And you were an unnecessary character at that physical point in time, not because of your unimportance, but due to the fact that a cosmic character was being substituted with Ed McCabe.
Right, of course, a variable.
Right.
So you're expanding into a more general approach to a blue pillar instead of just the specific Steve example.
Well, but the
whole
flip side is the same is true. Whenever whenever you are at the other pillar and at the helm, my physical presence is not. It's not that it's not required. It can't even be actualized because I am the representation of reality. So unless I'm making the reality happen for what we have discerned needs to happen, whereas you have to be in the shadows.
Right. Yeah. Nice. That's nice. The
If
shadows.
you are being the actual player interacting in the reality is the red, not me. I don't need to be there because it's being made happen.
Nice.
And that's how the equations work.
Nice.
If we're doing it as individuals in the physical sense, I force the reality into actualization.
Right.
If we're doing it as the characters, the reality plays itself out, and I don't need to take the physical role in making the reality happen because we're influencing it as individuals and making the reality happen.
Nice.
And that's the difference in where the equations come into play.
Right.
So what the two equations did was allow us to figure out what we physically need to do as individuals to get one line going, and then also what needs to be happening or what the occurrence of what will happen as our representations on a cosmic level influencing our pushing that stuff forward. And it's a symbiosis of the two, and where those two lines intersect, us being our characters in the cosmic forcing the issue of a real reality, as well as us physically moving towards that actualization and making the reality happen. It will happen at X point, and we were able to pick that point on the chart.
Yeah.
And well, how does that help? It's just two lines intersecting. Well, when is that when? Of course it's eventually going to happen, but how do you dictate? Tell me when that's going to happen. Easy. In each of the quadrants, we put a chart of familiarity. So if we're working in the science or medical field, we would then delineate all the boxes for that quadrant in medical terms.
Right. Right.
And then over here, in reality, we would dictate all the different Ebola, all the different ailments that are there that we're trying to use a medical technology to fix.
Right.
And the offsetting quadrants would be examples of maybe the people who are most affected by those ailments.
Yep.
And the people that could most fix those ailments, as well as in the and then what we do is, as we are drawing these lines, we see what boxes and colors of, because the other colors come into play. They're evil because evil. This is what the other thing, like just to get into the general colorization of why, even though we broke it down just the four of us, how all the colors play a part.
Right.
Evil is not negative energy. Evil is just that which is not accepted as truth by current realization.
Right.
In other words, it is real, but it is unaccepted, so that makes it evil. It's not negative. It's just
isolated.
So all the fairy tales are true,
Yeah.
but because they will not be accepted they fall into the yellow category. All the mythologies are true. All the character names, all the everybody, all the mythos that we've come up with is all truth, but it's unnecessary truth because it can't be accepted.
Yep.
So, and it's all the same. We're always saying the same thing. So to break it down to one of the very most basic charts we ever had with just the players on a cosmic level, we're still talking their boxes, just using different language for that box because no one gives a shit about them. That's all there is to it.
Right, indeed. And so now, then the vertex concept is this idea of these lines. This was your big map vertex concept where the different parts of it, second sight, doorways, and no big deal, right? No big deal section here. This is the deja vu, second sight, doorways, no big deal.
To put it in stream of consciousness, and to figure out, because the whole thing was proof for ourselves also that intuitiveness is not just random, that you can actually know what is and what will be before it happens. And we called it deja vu. And is there vujade up here too?
Deja vu with doorways.
Okay, well, doorways would be vujade.
Right.
And in other words, it sucks when you feel like something has already happened, you've already been somewhere before. What we were trying to do is get to the point where we were knowing and anticipating what was going to happen and make it come to a fruition. And that is a doorway. Instead of, and that's why these quadrants, the transgression of energy is always up and out, or over and out, instead of down and down, because we want to, this is where most people were already, or coming from already, and they couldn't actualize this because it's an innate portion of our nature, or it's in the subconscious portion of it, of the conscious. So everything comes out of here, and mainly what we were trying to do was, this is where we were trying to get to. Up in anything that we could make intersect up in here, then we were actually in the future, but in the now predicting the future. And we were trying to actualize anything in the purple because then we knew that we were dead on for what was right and what needed to happen.
Now explain the no big deal trap. How does that, because that's below on this side. In other words, the energy comes out through the vertex and it's either doorways or no big deal.
Right.
Why is that trapped then? And how can you give examples of how it becomes no big deal as opposed to doorways?
Because this is also the collective unconscious. In other words, everybody, the only example I can give you is, okay, back in 1986, I'm dating a girl. I'm trying to figure out something to give her for her birthday. I can't think of anything. So I go to Triangle Mobile, Westerly, Rhode Island. The Triangle Mobile gas station, and Dick was the owner at the time. And I walked in and I said, Dick, I have $50. I want you to take, and this is when they had the old credit card machines where everything was done by traversing the machine over the credit card. I said, I want you to take 5 credit card slips and run them across for $10 each. I'll give you $50 cash ahead of time. So, hence, he gave me back 10 slips that he signed himself saying they were good for $10 worth of gas each. And I'd given him $50.
Okay.
I gave those to my girlfriend. Whenever she needed gas, she could go to the Triangle Mobile station and turn one of those slips in and get $10 worth of gas. That has now become the prepaid gas card.
Yeah, you're right.
But it is now no big deal.
Because I see.
Because I never actualized it as a doorway for my own personal success. So I didn't take that particular concept. In other words, this is individual action before mass recognition. So for right now, if I go into a gas station and use my prepaid gas card for gas, it's no big deal. Whereas when my girlfriend walked into the gas station with a $10 slip of prepaid gas, no one had ever heard of anything like that before. And it was new and innovative at the time, and an unexpected, unforeseen, and an admirable situation. And that's where this is, where the collective unconscious is already caught up with the general acceptance of that which you're trying to preach. So it's the reverse of beating a dead horse, where I'm preaching to the choir. This is preaching to the choir more than anything else.
I see.
And so that's where like why it's blue and green is because this is the whole cultist situation. You already have your disciples, so that what you are preaching is no big deal to your people.
They've already heard it all before, right?
They've bitten into it.
Or they're just going to buy whatever you say next no matter what.
Right. It's no longer contemporary moving around the flow, whereas at least in the deja vu, the other flip side, we're able to use our representations of our fourth dimensional selves and a portion of reality, mix those together to force ourselves to create
the doorways.
And now, that's the difference.
How does the second sight relate to the doorways, that top quadrant, the top two quadrants? How do they relate to each other?
Okay, well, this then is the conscious subconscious. You're always processing information at all times, and you innately already know everything there is to know.
Yeah.
But that is in your subconscious and will never be able to be pulled out of yourself unless you're having a metaphysical experience.
Plato called it anamnesis, remembering what you know.
Right. I guess that would be good.
Yeah.
So why it falls under shadow and why I put it in the third dimension for us is because it's interaction. If you are living who you are for the fourth dimension in this reality and being accepted for it, you will have the ability then, people just in general, who's that guy, and people watch your action there. You become an enigma almost, because you have the ability to direct the flow of where everyone else will be once you get there also. You already know where you want to go, no matter what you're going to get there. You don't influence anybody else in getting there with you, but you have the innate ability to have all those people there with you when you get there. So that's where what I was trying to mostly express to us during those times in San Diego was we need to be able to be where everybody else is at when they get there with them, not ahead of them, because we don't want to do the I told you so. Right. And not before them. Well, excuse me, that's the same thing. And not after them, because then it becomes no big deal. Right. So the timing is the most important thing. And the point is, we know ahead of time where it is we're trying to get everybody. And we actually have the way to get there. Yep. And we actually have the ability to not influence, but to guide everybody there at the same time. No child left behind.
Right, I see. Excellent. Now, I want to segue to the big graph, okay, which we have here. Okay, this is, let's see, here it is. If you remember this, and you got your formula thing on the bottom, right? And this was a kind of the first approach to this quadrant thing. This was the first one you did, Mike. And then what you did after this one is you added another chart to each side here and came up with the 4. Right. But first you did this one, and you came up with this. This is the mundane, I guess. TM over 2. Theatrical mathematics divided by 2. Mundane divided by cosmic.
Right, because there were 2 of them. And this is the one that we wanted to use mostly because basically, it's still using both sides. And this folds under itself. Oh, yeah? I never finished. That's the whole point, because all charts become one and everything else. But the collective unconscious, so this is everybody's awareness, even though they're not aware. Influenced by an individual self-awareness. Yep. So my ability to know what's going on in this collective unconscious. This is the way to be able to influence the cosmic.
Only personal equation.
Only persona equation possible.
Person plus thought equals thought minus person.
Right, but these are filters.
Subconscious and conscious. I see. And you got the. I see.
So, but basically
mundane cosmic, right?
That the only way the only way for everything to become acceptable with your own personal push. Wow.
Now what's happening in the bottom right here with the V1, V2? You see that square? You got your square concept there. What's that? What's happening there?
I believe these are the different quadrants, because this is still one chart, but the one chart has to be made up of 4 charts.
Right, I've got
right.
some of those too. Let's see, I can whip out one of those too. After we look at this for a minute, I'll whip out the other big one you have, which has the 4, etc. But I just want to focus on this one first because you actually started with this idea. In fact, I remember you, Mike. Now, just can you give me a comment? Because what had happened now? First, we started with this thing here, the A-Team realization, right, in February, and then all through March and April of that Titanic period, you were appearing and disappearing, but coming back for these late night sessions where essentially you and I, and you were doing these charts and coming up with these graph ideas, and you had that one, when you finally reached a peak with all this, you had that one big day with Warren, where you laid it all out for him, etc.
Right.
But mostly it was you alone primarily. I was observing, commenting, but you just went let loose with all this graph stuff, and like, what was happening in your mind at that time?
I was basically figuring out how each one of us needed to think. And then how each one of us needed to act in order for us to take everybody in the world to a point in place where they would get it.
Now, can you explain your core concept in that was the x-axis and the y-axis.
Right.
X-axis is the live, the y-axis is the figure out.
Right.
And what generally were you doing with that duality?
Well, that was the whole theatrical mathematics, was that we needed to be physically moving, as I was explaining earlier, physically moving on one axis while we were figuring out the figure. It's the 2 lines that would intersect. That is, we took where we're at and where we want to be as one line, and what we need to do with what we have available to us in order to get there was the other line, and where they met was how to make it happen.
I see.
So in other words, that's why I had to break it down with how each one of us thought and worked, because somebody needed to spot out, this is what we need to do, and I would come up with how we could do that. But somebody else needed to do, well, these are the cast of characters we have to use in order to get us there.
Yep.
And so that would be you. And Warren was supposed to come up with what we needed to do, and I'd come up with how we were able to do it, and Greg would be able to say whether or not he'd buy it.
Yeah, nice.
And that's where these little other equations right here come into play, where, like, for what equation is for each person. For Warren, he was the green plus G plus R equals P minus B, and they said the plus is each symbol meant a specific word, and we still haven't, and it's probably for the best that we haven't stumbled upon that actual translation.
Oh, I do have it, Mike. I do have it. What each symbol went as acceptable to, according, etc. Right.
So,
and that's actually in the red text. You had come up with that right at the start. Before the graphs, you came up with this concept here, and we can find it. It's really quick. When you start breaking down the let's see, breaking down the things, acceptable to, let's see, regulated by. I'll find, actually. Let me, if you can just take the camera. I'll find it in here. The characterizations. I'll give you another graph to look at too. See, then this actually is one that Warren and I came up with after the fact, using your formula of the 4 quadrants, right? We were trying to look at collective consciousness type stuff, right? And here we have your basic idea of the 4. I'll whip out one of yours though, but you had come up with this here of the quadrants, a chart on each side, and then the square in the center. Right. So we got, the void and B, and the laws concept there, and the square. But I know I have one of yours, your original big one here. I got it all in here, Mike. It's such a cornucopia. Here it is. This is the real shit. Okay, let's get my thing out of here.
For now.
This is Warren and I with Dr. Hills and all that. Trying to tap into looking at the collective consciousness, but. Here, this is Mike Silva at the peak. In that whole period, this is where it all peaks. Right?
Yep.
This is it now. Here you go. Okay.
Those are all the different equations, Steve.
Yes,
of
it
how
is.
to-
It's all of it. And this, I remember you sitting outside. Okay, actually, I got to get my cord out from underneath there.
Hand of God.
Now,
How to become the hand of God.
you were sitting outside of the San Diego apartment on the porch one day, and this was what happened as a result of that day. This was where you broke it down, and this is the graph. When you talk about the graph, the big graph, you have a dual. I guess it's inside out. I don't know. I can't even tell you. You have to tell me. Why are there two of those? For one thing, and one's mundane, one's cosmic. Is that how it is?
Yep. Because even though, yes, the application of how to function in the cosmic reality and the application of how to function in the mundane reality.
Bum bum bum.
And basically,
Wow. Do I deliver or what, Mike? That is it. This is the artifact of that time. This was where it all came together. And this, I then developed on my own, studying this, recognizing it as a peak of the perimeter. I then got the idea of, well, let's focus on this 49 square centerpiece that's created by the four charts, right?
right.
And I came up with, for me, it became the magic square, right? And that's the floor of the temple, Mike. In the Temple of Solomon, they have in a Freemasonry lodge, they have the checkerboard square, right?
We know that.
Right?
Yes.
And then what it is, I'll just give you a little bit of mythology on that, right? Is that in the old days in the Freemasonry, right? The reason that they have this grid in the center is that the master would draw the design for whatever's being built in a sand pit. There was a grid with quadrants. And then as the building was completed, as the sections corresponding to that design were completed, they were rubbed out. And the master would, if he approved.
Right.
Right? So it's a figure it out, live type process created by the intersecting of the quadrants. But I really, what was going on in your mind when this was coming into play?
This is the cosmic side. This is the mundane side. These were us as the characters of the A-team and our specific relevant chart. So this would be you right here.
Yeah.
And then this is you right here.
Uh-huh.
And these are our specific charts and interactions. And I had basically figured out that everything is four as we had decided, but anything is. At the time, MRIs were brand new. Okay, magnetic resonance imaging.
Yep.
I'm sitting in this class when I was doing the subconscious conscious at the marine biology class I was telling you about, and for the hell of it, when I came up with the equations, I took the different four wavelengths, gamma, theta, beta, and alpha, and put them into the equation. And it turns out that in the order that they should be put in for the equation, it was an MRI. So I was able to explain what an MRI is and how it works without any other working knowledge of what the hell an MRI was, just because the equation was truth.
Right.
And this breaks down for us how to explain anything for the truth. And a lot of theories are incorrect.
Right.
And this basically takes the truth of everything and anything for what it is based on the theatrical mathematical equations. But this is the cosmic side of it, and this is the mundane side of it. Using the four of us in our specific charts, in the influences that we have on those charts.
Mike, you know what's incredible is that in the Freemasonry again, in the center of a Freemasonry lodge, it's not a square. You know what they have? A 7x14 chessboard type scenario, right?
Right.
And then a blazing star, joins them in the exact center, joining the two charts, right? So they're focusing on the two magic squares, 7x7, because in Freemasonry, the 7-leveled staircase, and at each step you apply the 7 liberal arts, right? And so it's the idea of, their ascension scheme, essentially, translated into the idea of a design, the pattern that you're walking, right? And so the pattern would be in a regular journey through those boxes, unique to each individual, or each group, or whatever, essentially, cosmically and mundanely, blah, blah, blah. But so...
Wow,
he's stunned! That's your brilliance, Mike. That's you at your peak, cosmically, right there.
It's not just, I don't care about that.
To me, I'm talking about how impressed I was by it, you know?
Well, I mean, we can make the four of us with this together could explain and or make anything happen.
Indeed.
Anything.
Indeed.
And the biggest point, I mean, I can't believe I have the different waves in here.
You got it all on that thing. And it seems like you were just madly producing the structure, couldn't stop for the content. You had a structure fever that broke in the form of this diagram.
Well, right, because I had to take this is sciences, religions, everything that's already known to man and makes it consistent. It shows, like, this is the theory of relativity expressed properly, but it's also can explain geometrical shapes at the same time.
Yep.
Or it can explain your freaking Ramazook and
right.
and all of that. And,
right.
And each one of us is a representation of each of the equations. Wow.
Stunned by his own brilliance.
No.
No, I know, but I'm just stroking you a little bit because it really, to me, I was just in awe. At the time, now for me, just briefly, I was doing my 7 days a week thing where I was channeling a different cosmic being every day of the week.
Right.
And I had on the weekends was the 8th where I would reemerge Steve, and that's when we'd have these sessions on the weekend when Mike Silva would come down, and that's when you have the processing. So you're in the class or at work or doing whatever during the week, and you're processing these ideas, and then you'd have these releases on that weekend. It was like a 6-week period.
On this mundane level here, if you want a quickening, this is the formula to quicken yourself. This is the formula for prophecy or for resourcefulness. If you need the formula for thinking, for maturing and growth.
Yeah.
For
zooming in on Mike Silva's finger on the individual boxes in a legendary moment.
For spirituality.
Yeah.
Wow. And each one is still its own.
And what I trip out on with this when I was looking at it is the implied equal plane of all these boxes together and the whole four-dimensional plane and the door. Now, how does this double graph here relate to the idea of the door that was being opened? The doorways.
Well, because this was it.
This is the writing on the wall, essentially.
Yeah, but no, the door only became one little box of all of these boxes.
Right.
It became totally insignificant as far as...
See, that's interesting. We have been focusing on finding the door, and in an attempt to find it, you come up with this, and then realize, no, the door is not the point, it's this.
We come up with this. We could find any of all the doors that we wanted.
And opening the door is equivalent to popping the quiff. We realized we couldn't do that at the time, almost. As a group.
That wasn't right to be decided by me anyway.
Well, that's it. That's what BA is the driver, right? And it was a Hannibal decision.
The main thing of all that, what you're saying about the door, is, like I said, it became so insignificant because who gives a shit about getting to one of the multitude of doors that there are? Because there are a multitude, and we were having a hard enough time just trying to figure out how to get to one, and all of a sudden, just through one of these little one of these goes to every single door, and how to get to every single door.
Yeah.
But why bother with every single door when we could actually,
wow.
We could walk into the universe right now with this.
Interesting.
Physically walk into the fourth dimension, not through a door, but just like beam me up, Scotty shit.
Right.
I just can't interpret it properly at the moment, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, well, that's it. We don't want to pop the quiff. Now, just as a note here, we got 15 minutes left. Do you want to pause maybe for a moment and just pause on this piece here just for a second, collect ourselves, and decide what we want to do with that last 15 minutes? Because right now, this is the peak, the pillar point. Right. We're back at that moment, that golden moment that we had. This was the peak. This was the culmination of that whole A-team reprocessing of the chart, bigger picture, larger scheme, full alphabet, blah, blah, blah. The formulas and the scientific approach really allowed us to make that breakthrough. And 14 minutes, I got to pause. Okay, we're going to just pause here, and then we're returning with the grand conclusion.